So hello everyone. Rachel's still on holiday, so I'm going to record this and maybe one or two more before she's back because I've got a little bit of time off work. So please follow us, subscribe, still leave your comments. I'll try and slow down a little bit. I know my accent's tough for some people, so I'll try and slow down and make it easier for those that struggle with my accent. I appreciate you sticking with us. It's 2009 in a building society office in Yorkshire. A clerk is doing something thousands of clerks do every working day. They're checking a withdrawal slip against a specimen signature held on file. The account belongs to an elderly customer in Northumberland, a retired accountant named Eric Brown, and the signature on the slip is close. It's a decent attempt, but it isn't his. The clerk flags it. The Skipton Building Society writes to Mr. Brown and says, politely, that I'd like to visit him in person, just to validate his signature. And that letter sets off a chain reaction, because the man who has been signing Eric Brown's name cannot allow that visit to happen. Eric Brown has been dead for over a year. And Eric Brown's daughter, Janet, the woman everyone believes is living a new life somewhere on the continent, has been dead for more than 4 years. Nobody's looking for her. There's no missing person inquiry, no police file, no appeal. As far as the world knows, Janet Brown simply chose to leave. But one mismatched signature is about to unravel what a detective would later describe as a crime that could have been a perfect murder. So this is Picture the Scene, and I want to tell you about Janet Brown. Not just how she died, but who she was, how a killer saw her money, her voice, and very nearly her memory, and how a jury convicted him of murder without her body ever being found. Janet Brown was 45 years old in the summer of 2005. She lived in a converted barn at Plaintrees Farm in the hamlet of Lowgate, just outside Hexham in Northumberland. If you don't know that part of the world, just picture it with me for a moment. It's Hadrian's Royal Country, high, open, beautiful, and quiet. Her elderly parents, Eric and Olive Brown, lived in a farmhouse next door. Eric was a retired accountant, family was comfortably off, and Janet had built on that herself, making her own money developing property. So people who knew her, and the police would later spend years reconstructing her life, described her the same way, independent but fiercely so. She loved animals. She had a dog she adored. She loved to travel, and she often travelled alone, quite happily. She didn't have a regular 9 to 5. She picked up casual work that suited her, appearing as a television and film extra, doing stints as a market researcher and mystery shopper, and she lived her life on her own terms, how she wanted to live. And that independence really does matter to this story, because it was the very thing her killer weaponized. A woman who travels alone, who comes and goes as she pleases, who doesn't clock in anywhere on a Monday morning, is a woman whose absence can be explained away. Her relationship with her parents was, in the court's words, strained at times. But the judge was clear there was real affection there. She was their only daughter, and as you hear, Eric and Olive's love for Janet and their willingness to believe she was out there somewhere living her best life was exploited in one of the cruelest ways we have ever covered on this show. And then there was Donald Graham. Graham lived at Sparty Lee, up the East Island Valley, south of Hexham. He was married, and he never left his wife, but for years he and Janet had been in a relationship. He had worked, amongst other things, as a JCB driver, and by 2005 he was a man in his early 50s with a taste for a lifestyle he could not honestly afford. The court would later hear about the Ferrari, the flashy spending, all of it funded, in the end, by Janet. So to Janet, he was her long-term partner. To Graham, as the evidence would eventually show, she was something else. She was access to money. So let me walk you through 17 days in June 2005, because the entire case lives inside those 17 days. On the 1st of June 2005, Janet booked a ferry crossing Dover to Calais, parting in the early hours of 18th of June, returning on the 27th of June. She was taking a car, and the booking was for 2 people, her and Graham. She later told her friends that they were going touring in France together, a holiday with her partner. Then sometime in the days that followed, Graham pulled out. His excuse was that his wife was seriously ill. So the court found that was a complete lie. Mr. Justice Openshaw went further. He said that he did not believe Graham ever had the slightest intention of going to France. In a judge's assessment, Graham had realised something. Janet's holiday created an opportunity. If she vanished around the time she was due to leave the country, her absence would explain itself. She hadn't disappeared. She'd gone abroad and stayed abroad. So Janet being Janet, decided to go alone anyway. So now let's get on to the money, shall we? In the first half of June 2005, Janet made several attempts to withdraw £300,000 from one of her savings accounts. She told a bank she needed it to buy property and gave no further details. And on the 16th of June 2005, 2 days before that ferry was due to sail, she made a telegraphic transfer of £300,000 from her savings into an account belonging to Donald Graham. So there's no paperwork behind that transfer, no contracts, no loan agreement, no note of what it was for. When police asked Graham about it years later, he repeatedly said he couldn't discuss it unless Janet authorised him to, which was convenient because Janet was dead. The judge was sure the money was obtained by some deceit on Graham's part. The most likely version, the court thought, was that Janet believed Graham was going to buy property with it, perhaps for them together. What actually happened is a matter of record. Within a couple of months of Janet's disappearance, Graham had spent £193,000 of her £300,000 buying a house at 109 Elsdon Avenue in Seaton, Delaval. Not for Janet, for a new girlfriend, Elizabeth Todd, a woman who Graham had only met a couple of weeks before Janet vanished. Sit with the timing of that for a second, will you? While Janet was planning a holiday with the man she'd been with for years, he had already met the woman he would install in a house bought with Janet's money. So let's move on to the 17th of June 2005. If Janet was going to catch a ferry from Dover in the early hours of the 18th of June, she needed to leave Hexham by early afternoon of 17th of June. And that was the plan. And that evening, by arrangement, a friend went round to the barn at Plaintree's farm to collect Janet's dog, to look after it while she was away. But Janet wasn't there. The friend assumed exactly what anyone would assume. She's on the road. She's heading south to Dover. But, she never called that ferry. The court's finding was stark. Janet Brown never left Hexham at all. Police would later place her death somewhere in a narrow window, roughly between the 15th and 18th of June 2005, with the 15th of June being the last day anyone she knew had confirmed contact with her, when she spoke to a friend about the dog. I cannot tell you where Janet was killed. I cannot tell you when or how, but neither can the court, so I'm not going to invent it. What Mr. Justice Openshaw said he could be sure of, beyond doubt, on the whole of the evidence, was that Donald Graham murdered her, and that he disposed of her body. What the court could say, it said with absolute clarity. These are the words of Mr. Justice Openshaw from the published sentencing remarks exactly as he delivered them. Cannot properly infer from the evidence where, or when, or how the defendant murdered Janet Brown, but it is proved beyond doubt that he did so. Nor can I say where or how he disposed of her body. He was once a JCB driver. He could have disposed of her in some deeply dug pit, or put her down one of the many mine shafts in the area, or perhaps buried her in some wild and remote place. That he has disposed of her body is an aggravating factor. So a deeply dug pit, a mine shaft, somewhere wild and remote. That part of Northumberland is riddled with old mine workings from the lead industry, and Graham knew the ground. Nobody knows which of these it was, or whether it was any of them at all. But 21 years on, nobody has ever found her. So here's the part of this case that I find genuinely hard to comprehend. Janet Brown was murdered in June 2005. Her murder was not investigated until 2010. Not because the police failed, because nobody knew there was anything to investigate. So think about what usually happens when someone vanishes, will you? Family raise the alarm, an employee notices the empty desk, friends compare notes. Within days there's a report, a file, a search. Janet had none of the usual tripwires. No office expecting her on Monday, a pattern of solo travel, elderly parents next door who had been told and would go on being told their daughter was fine. There was one early flicker though. On the 20th of June 2005, the day after Janet was supposedly due back from France, she failed to turn up for a work commitment, and police were asked to call her home for a welfare check. An officer spoke to her parents, and her parents told them what they believed to be true. Janet had extended her holiday, and that's what they understood. So the check went no further. And from there, Graham went to work on the silence. He wrote letters and cards to Eric and Olive, composed as if it was from Janet. Their daughter's voice, on paper, telling them she'd left England, that she'd found work abroad, that she was making a new life for herself in France or in Switzerland. The details shifted over time, and Eric and Olive believed it. But why wouldn't they? Because Janet was independent. She'd always been very independent. Janet travelled. Janet did things her own way. The lie was built precisely to fit the shape of the woman that they already knew. And there was some evidence at trial of a phone call on the 23rd of July 2005, supposedly from Janet. The judge doubted any such call happened at all, and it said that if it did, it certainly wasn't Janet on the line. It was something Graham had devised. And now Mr. Justice Openshaw made an observation about this period that has stayed with me since I first read these remarks. He said Graham must have been astonished that Janet's parents seemed to just accept her disappearance, and that no missing person investigation ever began. And then, as the months turned into years, the judge said that he must have come to believe that he had indeed got away with murder. So that line there, that's the hinge of this whole story. The murder had happened, and the world just simply carried on. So Olive Brown died in January 2007, and her daughter did not come home for the funeral. Eric Brown died on the 16th of March 2008. His daughter did not come home for that funeral either, but Donald Graham attended both of those funerals. So let me say that again, will you? Because it's a detail in this case that I think tells you everything about the man. He murdered their daughter. He then wrote them letters in her name for the rest of their lives, letting two elderly people go to their graves, believing that Janet was alive and simply had her come back to say goodbye. And then he stood at their funerals. And when Eric died, Graham didn't even inform Eric's few surviving relatives. He didn't inform Eric's solicitor. He arranged the funeral himself. He was already thinking about what came next. Because here's the thing about this case. The £300,000 was only in the beginning. After that transfer, Janet still had over £85,000 in her accounts, and over the following years, by forgery and fraud, Graham drained the lot. Over £100,000 once everything was totted up. Now, the judge put it plainly. Graham took every single penny that she had. But it was Eric's death in March 2008 that opened the door to what the judge called an even more audacious series of frauds. Because Eric Brown had made a genuine will. He left it to say to Janet, and if Janet died before him, everything was to go to the guide dogs for the blind, because Eric was losing his eyesight in his final years, and the court thought that there was no doubt why he chose that charity. It's a small human detail, but it's a very poignant detail. A dying man, going blind, quietly leaving everything to guide dogs if his daughter couldn't inherit. But Donald Graham, forged a new will. He had Elizabeth Todd write out a will purporting to be Eric's, leaving the entire estate to Donald Graham. And then, and this is a detail that took my breath away when I first read it, he had a forged Janet Brown signature on it as an attesting witness. So just think about what that means. Janet was dead, and Graham knew she was dead because he had killed her, and he used her forged signature to witness a fake will that disinherited her from her own father's estate. Her hand mimics signing away her inheritance. The judge describes a will forgery as being a bad case of forgery as one ever encounters in practice, aggravated by the fact that he cheated the guide dogs for the blind out of £300,000 or more. So armed with a forged will, and somehow in possession of all the relevant passwords and security answers, Graham went through the Browns' accounts like a man stripping a house. £123,000 from Eric and Ollie's nationwide account, nearly £40,000 from their NatWest accounts, forged checks, forged withdrawal slips, over and above the original £300,000. The court found he obtained a further £285,000 by fraud, and he tried to get even more. He even went after the farm itself. He walked into a solicitor's office in Hexham in person and claimed he was entitled to the farm. When the solicitors wanted verification, he compelled his own wife to impersonate Janet on the telephone. The solicitors, to their great credit, refused to move without documentary proof and identification from Janet herself, which, of course, Graham could never provide. And what was all this for? A house and a new girlfriend? Luxury cars? Including a Ferrari? What the judge called an extravagant and flashy lifestyle? Funded entirely by a dead woman and her dead parents. So the frauds were, in this case, I've skipped past this part too fastly. He had a wife and a girlfriend, and he got them both involved. So just think about that as well. So the frauds were, in the judge's assessment, professionally planned, carried out on many occasions over a long period, and every single one of them, he said, was made possible only by the murder. So that sentence again is worth holding on to. This wasn't a murder with some fraud attached. The murder was the foundation stone of a business model, which brings us back to where we started. A clerk, a withdrawal slip, a signature that didn't match. So at some point, Graham began making withdrawals from Eric Brown's account at the Skipton Building Society. And that was his undoing. An alert clerk compared the signature on a withdrawal slip against a specimen signature held on file for Eric Brown, a retired accountant, and saw that it didn't match. So the society wrote to their customer, "We'd like to visit Mr. Brown in person to validate his signature. Please let us know when we can do that." Graham could not let that visit happen, though. So he began writing back, and the letters, as the judge described them, became even more extravagant. First he wrote as Eric Brown, "I'm aged now, I'm infirm." Then Elizabeth Todd write letters in the name of Janet Brown, explaining that her poor father was in a pitiful condition, that he was moving into residential care. Personal visit was simply out of the question. The Skipton Building Society was not deceived, though. The concern went to the fraud team, and the fraud team went to the police. So in 2009, Northumbria Police opened up an investigation into fraud, though, not murder. False signatures, suspicious withdrawals, an account holder who could not be produced. And as the detectives followed the money, the same question kept surfacing and refusing to be answered. Where is Janet Brown? She was the account holder's daughter. She was the beneficiary of the genuine will. Letters in her name existed. Someone claiming to be her had spoken on the phone, and yet there was no trace of her. No travel records that held up, no address abroad, no doctor, no dentist, no bank activity that couldn't be traced back to Graham. Nothing. And the efforts to find Janet alive failed because Janet was simply not alive. A fraud inquiry became a missing person inquiry. A missing person inquiry became a murder inquiry. Donald Graham was arrested in April 2010. And then came the searches. Police went over Janet's parents' property and Graham's addresses with cadaver dogs, search specialists, and ground-penetrating radar. They searched land near Spartilia. They were looking for Janet, but they did not find her. In September 2013, Graham, then 59 and living at Elsden Avenue in Seaton Deval, in the very house bought with Janet's money, was charged with her murder, along with 2 counts of obtaining a money transfer by deception and 13 counts of fraud. Elizabeth Todd, then 51, of the same address, was jointly charged with forgery, conspiracy to commit fraud, and perverting the course of justice. But there's still one more account of deception to account for. When Graham was on bail during the murder investigation, he persuaded Elizabeth Todd to phone the Overstone care home in Hexham, where one of Janet's friends worked, and pretend to be Janet, back home from a visit from Switzerland. So the whole purpose of the call was for that news to reach the police and derail the inquiry into her disappearance, feeding false information into a live murder investigation. So that call became the charge of perverting the course of justice. The trial opened at Newcastle Crown Court on the 6th of May 2014 before Mr. Justice Openshaw. So understand what the prosecution was taking on here. They had no body, no crime scene, no cause of death, no witness to any killing. Graham denied murder throughout, and he has never once admitted it since. What the Crown had instead was a web. The unexplained £300,000 transferred 2 days before Janet vanished. The holiday Graham backed out of on a lie. The girlfriend acquired 2 weeks before the disappearance and housed with the victim's money were letters, the forged will with a dead woman's signature as witness, the impersonations, the years of systemic theft from Janet and her parents, and at the centre of it all, the total absolute absence of Janet Brown from the world after the 17th of June 2005, an absence that only one living person had ever worked to explain away. Before the trial, in March 2014, Graham had pleaded guilty to the frauds and forgeries. The jury didn't believe him. After a long trial, on the 19th of June 2014, they convicted Donald Graham of the murder of Janet Brown and of perverting the course of justice. The following day, 20th of June 2014, Mr. Justice Openshaw passed sentence. His remarks run to 5 pages, but I'm just going to read you one sentence, if that's okay. Janet Brown disappeared on or about the 17th of June 2005. She has never been seen since. Her body has never been found. She was then aged 45. So, in that The judge came to say that there was 3 plain clauses, and he signed them the entire case. The judge found that this was murder for gain, committed either to obtain or to keep the £300,000. Under Schedule 21 of the Criminal Justice Act 2003, murder for gain is treated as being of particularly high seriousness, carrying a starting point of 30 years for the minimum term. There was, he found, a clear element of planning. He then identified the aggravating factors. First, that Graham had disposed of Janet's body. Second, the frauds and forgeries committed after her death, which the judge accepted were opportunistic rather than planned at the time of the murder, but which he said must increase the term, otherwise Graham would effectively face no additional penalty for them at all. But no substantial mitigation was put forward. None. Graham was 60 years old by then, and the judge considered whether to reduce the term because Graham would be a very old man before he could even be considered for release. But he decided against it, reasoning that when Parliament allowed age to count as mitigation, it meant age at sentence, not age at release. Life imprisonment, minimum term, 32 years. That's what Donald Graham got convicted with. Graham will be in his 90s before the parole board can even look at him, if he's even alive at that time. For the other offences, concurrent sentences. 8 years for forging a will, from a starting point of 10, the statutory maximum, which the judge considered justified in these singular circumstances. 5.5 years for the deception and fraud counts. 4 years for perverting the course of justice. Elizabeth Todd maintained throughout that she was an innocent dupe, another victim of Graham's deceit, manipulation, and the judge notably didn't rubbish that characterisation when describing her role. She was dealt with separately, and was later sentenced for her part in the frauds. She was sentenced to 6 months in prison, suspended for 18 months. But there's one more detail from the reporting worth including. This is believed to be the only murder conviction Northumbria Police had ever secured without a body in the whole history of the force. Detective Chief Inspector Paul Woods, who worked the case, later reflected on how close it came to never being solved at all, saying, "It could have been a perfect murder. No alarm ever raised, no investigation for half a decade. If Donald Graham had stayed away from Eric Brown's skipped account or forged one signature more carefully, it's genuinely difficult to say when or whether anyone would have ever looked for Janet." So I guess the question is, where is Janet? The conviction wasn't quite the end of the police work. In 2015, the year after the trial, a concealed air rifle was found at property previously linked to Graham, and it prompted further forensic activity. It changed nothing that mattered. Janet's remains were not recovered. Graham has never said what he did with her, not at the trial, not since. He continues, as far as anything on the public record shows, to deny her murder entirely, in the face of a jury verdict and 32 years. And that refusal connects with Janet's case to a wider story. You may know the name Marie McCourt. Her daughter Helen was murdered on Merseyside in 1988, and Helen's killers never revealed where her body was. Marie campaigned for decades for what became known as Helen's Law, formerly the Prisoner's Disclosure of Information About Victims Act, which came into force in 2021. It places a legal duty on the parole board to consider a killer's refusal to disclose the location of a victim's remains when deciding on release, and the anguish that refusal causes. Janet's case is one of those cited by campaigners in that cause, and on the 20th anniversary of Janet's disappearance, in June 2025, Marie McCourt spoke publicly about her sadness that, 2 decades on, Janet has still never been laid to rest. She described the concealment of her victim's body as a deliberate act of cruelty against the family left behind, and she appealed directly to Graham to finally tell police what he did so Janet can be found, brought home, and given the funeral that she deserves. Under Helen's Law, Graham's silence is no longer cost-free. If he does live to see a parole hearing in his early 90s, his refusal to give Janet back will be part of the case against releasing him. He may well, and it probably is likely that he will die in prison. Many will say that if he won't speak, that's exactly how it should be. But I want to end with Janet, everyone, because Donald Graham has taken up enough of this episode and enough of everything else. Janet Brown was 45. She was independent and capable and a bit unconventional in the best way. She made her own money, she loved her dog, she loved to travel on her own terms, on her own itinerary. In June 2005, she was packing for France, a drive to Dover, an early ferry, 9 days on the road, but she never left Hexham. And for 5 years, the world has told a story about her, that she'd gone abroad, that she'd chosen a new life, that she couldn't even be bothered to come home when her mother died, or her father. Every part of that story was written by a man who killed her, and for 5 years it held, because it was built out on the truest thing about her. Her independence was turned into her cover story. Her freedom was used to hide her murder. The court gave her back the truth. The jury said, beyond doubt, Janet Brown did not leave. She was murdered for money by the man she trusted, and he hid her, and he lied in her name for years. What the court could not give back is Janet herself. Somewhere in that high, quiet corner of Northumberland, or somewhere only one man knows, she's still waiting to be found. And if that ever changes, I'll come back and tell you. So you've been listening to Picture the Scene podcast. I've been flying solo this episode. Rach will be back with me soon. If you have any information about the whereabouts of Janet Brown's remains, please contact the Northumbria Police or pass the information anonymously through Crime Stoppers on 0800 555 111. So take care of each other, and I'm going to see you next time.